but I think the more important thing is I grew up here in LA. I went to Hamilton High School. My kids actually ended up following me through Palms Junior High in Hamilton. So I'm from this area. I actually grew up right next door to USC, and we were there during the Watts riots and a lot of the changes and turmoil that were occurring. And at the age of 4.5, I used to skip kindergarten, and we used to play hooky and go hang out at the Museum of Natural History over there next to USC. I learned that if you pretend that you're holding on to adults, that you can walk in place. So I learned that you can go in and see the museum, and that there's a back elevator that you can take up to the second floor, but they have the bones in the drawers, right? And probably little kids shouldn't be playing with that. And same thing for sneaking into football games and watching O.J. Simpson and that kind of thing. So that really is a sense of having grown up a little bit in a community that was in a lot of turmoil, and really getting a sense that when you're growing up in it, though, it didn't seem so bad. I mean, we found guns in the bushes, and yes, we carried knives, and yes, family members were killed by gunfire and that kind of thing. It happens, but when you're growing up in it, you don't really always see all of that. What you see is people. What you see is sort of daily life. It isn't that jungle that gets depicted by some politicians. It really is a place where, for me, it was a place of happiness, and a place where I could grow, and a place where I could thrive. And so that's what I think I really am looking for when I go into different communities, is where can this thriving occur? What is happening in these locations? Not through the lens of someone who really thinks this is so bad it needs to be fixed, but that there are resources that we can garner. Now, I didn't bring slides because I find lately that if I bring slides, I give the same old talk. And, and frankly, I got a sense that this wasn't that audience. So I thought I'd have a little bit more of a conversation, a little bit more of I've been taking a lot of time to find what's working well, what's working uniquely, what's a little bit different. And I think that when you look at the issue of criminalizing behavior, my focus is mostly on drug use and HIV. Recently, at the American Psychological Association, I'm on the Committee of Psychology and AIDS, and we put out a resolution condemning the criminalization of HIV and its impact on the communities that we serve. And so, the fact that by doing this, we're really making it more difficult to reach out to the population, making it more difficult to help save lives, and making it more difficult to work with people. And so we have that resolution. If you'd like to go and find that at DPA, or if you contact me, I can certainly provide it for you. We've been examining drug use and the issue of criminalizing drug use rather than treating it as a public health problem. Back in 2001, when I began looking at the numbers and its impact on the African American community in particular, I was really struck by how the war on drugs, I think you all know, of course, that it's disproportionately impacting the African American population. And I could have brought my slides showing those huge increases, but it was a 16-fold increase in incarceration to the point where 1 out of every 3 African American men in their lifetime will be felonized. This is state prison, federal prison. This is obscene. It's beyond obscene. It was really one of those moments for me where I thought about going back to throwing rocks at buildings in protest. And to be honest, I used to go to the Rand Corporation building back in the old days during the Vietnam War and throw rocks at that building. I didn't realize I was going to end up working there someday. All right, I sold that. But, we can each other. All right, so one of the things then that one of the things that we saw, for example, with the criminalization of drug use is that, particularly for African Americans, the increase within the first 2 years of incarceration rates were 16-fold. That the rates literally went up 16-fold within about a 5-year period. Now, if you look at the numbers for whites and Hispanics, the numbers went up about double for whites over the same period and then leveled off. And for Hispanics, it went up about 4 to 5-fold and then leveled off. So it really wasn't quite the same impact. The war on drugs clearly was very clearly a war on African American and the African American community. And if you look at who's in prison for drug use, you see that half of the Hispanic women who are in prison for a drug offense, 1/2. So we're talking about criminalizing behavior that really should not result in people's lives being turned upside down. And then once you're criminalized, especially if you're felonized, what ends up happening is that not only are you criminalized for that behavior of drug use, you're actually criminalized for inferences about the possibility that you might have used drugs. So you end up going back into prison or the jail system because they think you might have used, not because you actually have used, but it's because you didn't show for your appointment at the exact hour, or a policeman spots you and recognizes you as a former offender. And so once you're in that system, then all of your behavior is criminalized. And in fact, all of your access to care and all of those different benefits that everybody else receives are denied you even after you've been punished. So those are the aspects that I've seen as part of the problem, but it doesn't give us anything related to a solution. So what kinds of solutions are out there? Interestingly enough, most of the kind of bigger impact solutions are beginning to emerge from the criminal justice system. And to some extent, it's because it's somewhat self-serving, right? That the costs have been driven up so high for incarceration that now states are finding that they have to solve that problem. They have to change their behavior because they can't afford the prior behavior. Everybody kept telling them this is not the cost-effective strategy, but it had to hit them in the face. Also, courts have been placing a lot of systems under order to change, and they're now being monitored. So let's talk a little bit about what happened with the juvenile justice system, which very rapidly during the war on drugs became a minority system rather than a system that actually used to be a fairly white system. This is really fascinating how that flipped over in the 80s in particular. There's a group called the Hayward Burns Foundation, W. Hayward Burns Foundation, and they have been going out and working with these different criminal justice systems, the juvenile justice systems in different cities, Chicago, Santa Cruz, Seattle, San Francisco. And they're doing some very simple things. They're bringing together all the stakeholders. They're looking at the numbers and they're saying, where we see disparity, let's figure out why. Let's just go and ask some questions. And you see things like in Seattle, when a police officer would pick up a child on the street, and sometimes not even necessarily doing anything, but they'd ask the child, where are your parents? You can hang out in this corner, the neighbors are complaining, where are your parents? My mom's working, my dad's working. Well, let's try to give them a call. If they can't reach them, what do they do with them? So typically what they do is they take them to juvie. And that's the first thing that happens. So at juvie, they get screened, and very frequently, even though they don't meet the screening criteria, they get put into the juvenile justice system for 2 days until the judge sees them 2 days later and says, why are you here? And the kid usually says, I have no idea, I was just hanging out in the corner. So we spent now $500, we have a very pissed off kid, and now the kid's part of the system, all right? So what happens with the Hayward Burns group is that they went in and they said, look, isn't there someplace else you could take some of these children, or another procedure that you could do? And they very simply made out cards for the officers that said, if the child exhibits any signs of mental illness, if they seem depressed, if there's something that you think is unusual that's happening, call this number, you'll be directed where to drop the kid off. If the kid has drugs or is somehow involved in the drug trade in any way, here's our system for screening children with drug use. If the child is breaking the law or has something to do with the criminal justice system, then take them to the juvenile justice system drop-off location. But you can't do that until you call first and talk to the supervisor, who will make certain that you've screened properly. And what happened? Huge drop-off in numbers of children entering the juvenile justice system and being put into the system overnight. Huge drop-off. In Santa Cruz, where they began looking at these kinds of things systematically, the disparity index, the disproportion between, of minority versus white in the system, went from 4 to 2 within 2 years. Let me give you another example that happened, for example, in Santa Cruz. Now, these are fairly simple systemic issues, okay? These are not overt discrimination. These are not something that's so insidious or dark. It's just indecision about what to do in a situation where somebody's in front of you and you have to act. You're being watched, you have to take somebody someplace or do something. So another situation in Santa Cruz, they saw that when the young black women were being sent to a group home, so that out of the juvenile justice system to the group home, that virtually all of the African American young ladies were dropping out within 1 day. Virtually all. And they thought, that's an unusual number, let's go take a look. So they went and visited the site, and they were told, it's about shampoo. It's about hair. Well, what do you mean? Well, when they arrive, we tell them, here's a bottle of Prel, go shampoo. What's the purpose of this? Well, we don't want any mites or anything like that. Well, first of all, or lice. First of all, of course, Prel shampoo is not free lice, number one. And number two, entirely culturally inappropriate. Most of the young ladies were saying, these are cornrows, I don't do that. And so they would get into a fight and they would leave. And they'd be back in the juvenile justice system. So that their opportunity to get out was now gone. And they were essentially labeled, right? This person, we tried to place them and they lost their chance. It's a small thing. They suggested, perhaps the shampoo suggestion was inappropriate and that the suggestion was made that they drop it. And from then on, the disproportion disappeared. Small issue, small structural issue, but very pervasive. And so what they do is they're numbers driven. They just do a simple investigation. And you find that in many, many, many cases, it's a situation where somebody just was a little bit uncertain how to act, or they had a predisposition, or they were just insensitive, but they were structural issues that could be addressed. All right, so this is something I think that the Burns Foundation in particular has been very, very good at. And in fact, you find criminal justice systems around the country that are bragging about their successes, and when I look at who they've been working with, lo and behold, it's the Burns Foundation, it's the Hayward Burns Foundation. So another example of something fairly similar is, whenever I've worked with outreach teams or mental health teams in different locations, one of the things that we find is when the police contact us and ask for help, they are absolutely out of their minds frightened about dealing with anybody with a mental health issue. And I kind of get it. I mean, there was one time where there was a man on the street completely naked, and they were told that they had to go and find out what's going on. So they contacted the mental health group and they said, please come with us. Please come with us, because I'm not going by myself. And I don't know, how many of you have had somebody strip down naked and charge at you? Right? It sounds a little frightening. If you've been in these kinds of situations more than a few times than I have in locked units, you kind of understand this is what happens when somebody's forgotten to take their meds and they're a little manic depressive, or in fact, one time I was driving down the street and it was pouring rain in Boston, and I was on the highway, and there was a woman running down the middle of the road right towards me and through all the traffic, and then was gone. And when I got home, I called the unit I worked on, and they said, guess who's coming back? So we've seen this often, but when a police officer sees it, and in fact, when most citizens see this, it's the most frightening thing in the world. And when you're frightened and when all of your senses are elevated, what do? Right? You're not thinking now, you're just reacting. And most of what we're seeing in these situations where people are being shot on the street, it's like Nike was talking about. They ask the person, what are you doing? And the person says, I have no idea. Because at the moment, you just can't think. You've never experienced this situation before. You have no training on what to do. You don't even know what the next step is for you. And so that's where we need to interact more, particularly with first responders, with police officers, about behavior, about what to expect, about how to deal with people. This is not a skill that police officers typically. Now, I have a brother that's a police officer, so I'm here to tell you, he has no people skills whatsoever. I'm just picking on my brother. But this is not unusual. And you have to give those that we want to do something better, we have to give them skill sets or just a simple instruction on what to do, where to take somebody, how to respond. These are steps that we're finding more and more are working within, particularly within criminal justice systems. Now, I have a million stories. I'm going to just tell one more. Another thing that we're seeing is that police departments are beginning to hear the public health message. In Gloucester, Massachusetts, for example, a police officer, a police chief, decided that he had to do something about the children in his community that were dying. So he went out and put a notice up in the community that said, if you are a drug user, if you need help, come to the police station. We promise we will not arrest you. We will not lock you up. We will not harm you in any way. We promise we will find help for you. We promise that we will assign an angel to you and that they will help you find your way through the system. They will help you find treatment and they will help you get care. And he calls it a deflection program. It's not diversion, because diversion is once you're in the criminal justice system. It's deflection. Before you get in the door before you're incarcerated, he wants to make certain that you get care. And now there are 250, this was in 2014, there are now 250 police agencies with the same policy, reaching out into the community and saying, come to us, we can be your gateway to treatment. We can help you find care. These are the kinds of partnerships that we need to develop. But you know what the biggest complaint at the last conference was? I wasn't there, I read about this. They said the biggest complaint was that the service providers aren't playing ball with them. They refuse to assist them. And they talk about how, well, apparently they interviewed some of the service providers. They said, look, they get paid to do this. We don't. We get, we have a very different payment system. We have no resources to provide that assistance. So these are the kinds of small, I frankly find these to be smaller issues that need to be dealt with. We have now, I think, a big change in perception, particularly around substance use, but increasingly around mental illness and other related issues, where we can find sort of commonality, even with those who have been relatively insensitive to date. And so I thought that was the hopeful message I was trying to bring. So thank you very much.